Hi, I'm Henrik Mortensson. I'm back at my favorite cafe and working on part two of a video series on organizational change and improvement. Now, if you haven't watched the first part, I recommend that you do that before you view this part. Um, if you have, or if you want to have a go at part two first, well, let's get on with it. Now that we know what the problem with the more common organizational change methods is, and we have an overall idea of how to fix it, it's time to leave outer space and descend to the surface. In the second iteration, I'll walk you through the overall steps we use to get things started. The first steps are scripted. We follow a set process. But this is just in the beginning. Each team comes up with its own plans, so the process intentionally diverges after the initial steps. In practice, we see this divergence in small details almost immediately. After 2 to 3 days, each team follows its own course. It's important to understand that when I say team, I'm talking about any group in the organization at any level that works together towards a common goal. We can start the process at the top, at the bottom, or in the middle of the organizational hierarchy. When we start it at the bottom or middle, we are careful to align with the organization's strategic goals. So, let's go. A couple of notes. One of the things I do when I begin working with an organization is that I draw a battle map. This is an annotated map of the parts of the organization that influences my work. Now, most of the entities in the map are key people, teams, and organizational units like departments. The most important things in the map are the links between the entities. I annotate them so I know what kind of relationship it is: hierarchical, friendship, ally, potential adversary, information source, and so on. I continue to build and update the map throughout my time with the company. This helps keep me oriented. Over time, the map becomes a valuable source of inspiration for how to solve problems and how to avoid pitfalls. Battle maps are also useful for understanding how the organization works. This one shows where requirements are created, mostly in the yellow boxes, and how they make their way into a team, the green rectangle on the right. A map like this is a powerful tool for managers who want to communicate to the rest of the organization that there is a serious problem. I think you can figure out what the problem is when you look at this map. So creating maps like this is something we usually do separately from the main strategy and planning workshops, but I do deserve to be mentioned because they are very useful. For the strategy and planning workshops, I use two basic methods together. The first is Crawford Slip, a brainstorming method where everyone writes ideas on post-it notes or index cards. The method is similar to brainwriting, which you may have heard of. An advantage of Crawford Slip is that it allows very effective idea generation without good ideas getting squashed by dominant personalities. I do this with everyone physically present when possible, but you can get good results with Miro, Mural, and similar tools if you work with distributed teams. The other method I use is the logical thinking process, a problem solving and strategy development toolbox from the theory of constraints. The toolbox has 5 tools: goal maps for determining goals and identifying obstacles, current reality trees, basically a root cause analysis tool, and future reality trees for making broad plans, evaporating clouds, conflict resolution diagrams, and prerequisites trees, detailed work breakdowns for detailed plans. Using the full toolkit and all features of each tool can get complicated. I usually simplify a bit, otherwise we would get bogged down in how the tools are used rather than doing the job. So I focus on the first 3 tools and rarely use evaporating cloud and prerequisite tree. I also make other simplifications during the workshops. The reason is that it's worth sacrificing a little bit of accuracy the first time around in order to keep the focus on the actual problems to be solved. If I go into too much detail about the methods, the whole thing will turn into a method training class instead of a problem-solving workshop. I do encourage people who are interested in continuing to use the methods to, over time, add the more advanced stuff. So let's look at the improvement process. For starters, it's an iterative process. What I'm describing here is what we do the first 2 or 3 days. It's important to remember that this is just the startup. The real challenge is to keep the improvement process alive, ideally forever. Initially, we have a series of repeatable steps. I will walk you through the first iteration. On subsequent iterations, the process itself may change as we learn. This is a big difference from immutable frameworks like Scrum or frameworks that rest on immutable principles like SAFe. I expect my clients to learn and to adapt the way they work, including how this improvement process works when they learn better ways. When they do something really cool, well, I do appreciate if they teach it to me. So it works both ways. Another big difference is, well, it's an iterative process, not an incremental process like Scrum and Safe. This means that after the first iteration, we have a very minimalistic but working outline of the improvement process going. We then refine it over and over again, fleshing things out, filling things in, and also changing direction when we need to. Much like this presentation series. The first step is to map the current goal of the team or organizational unit that we're working with. We then break the goal down into sub-goals. Using theory of constraints terminology, we set a goal, identify critical success factors, and break them down into necessary conditions. At this stage, we also identify things that prevent us from achieving the entities in the goal map. You may think of these as impediments and blockers. Um, Using theory of constraints terminology, they are undesired entities. Armed with the undesired entities, we now brainstorm to identify their causes. This obviously works better the more we understand about how the organization works. I've found that most of the time, the people in the organization understand the immediate causes of their problems very well. Since we have a group of people brainstorming, we will have a lot of duplicate notes and near duplicate notes. We gather closely related items together in order to simplify a bit. The next step is to do a root cause analysis. For some things, we can identify clear root causes, but we may also tip over into the liminal and even complex domains where relationships are not causal. For our purposes, though, we do not need to be exact. We are working iteratively, so we will rely on feedback from each iteration to inform the next. It's worth noting that this is different from a pure theory of constraints approach. Theory of constraints assumes that we can identify strict cause-effect relationships, and we don't make that assumption. Much of the time, we can identify such relationships, but at other times we can't. And that is why we need to gather feedback and repeat the process. When we have the root cause analysis, we can brainstorm solutions. The solutions are called desired entities in theory of constraints speak. We can now build a plan that flips our problems to a set of solutions. We are working at a fairly high level here, so each solution can be regarded as a small project in itself. Now, I strongly recommend setting an explicit expiration date on the plan. The reason is that the plan and reality will not match. The plan just gives us our starting direction. Setting an expiration date on the plan forces us to update the plan before it goes bad, like a piece of moldy cheese or milk left out of the fridge for too long. What we do next depends on how the organization currently works. Most of the organizations I work with use Scrum or Lean, so they already have work queues in one form or another. If they have that, we stick the plans in the work queue so that they will get implemented just like any other job the organization does. So at this point, the team, department, or other organizational unit is ready to get to work. But we are not quite done yet. While working, we have almost certainly identified a bunch of things the team, department, or whatever organizational unit we are dealing with cannot solve itself. So we make a list of those things. Then we bring that list of things up one level in the organization. When I work with teams, I'm always careful to prepare their managers for what's coming before we start doing workshops. I don't hold back. I tell them they are in for a scary ride. It's highly likely they will get an avalanche of information about problems, and often problems that are important to solve and require quite a bit of ingenuity to fix. I also tell them that if all else fails, well, they can always blame the weird consultant. You know what? So far, nobody has done that. What this boils down to is that management now is set to go to work on improving processes and improving the organization too. The initial iteration takes 2 to 3 days. After that, you can get by with longer iterations. The length can vary depending on the situation. A general rule of thumb is that at top management level, you want to be faster than your competition. So, if the competition has a 1 year strategy cycle, you probably want yours to be 6 months or maybe even shorter. At lower levels, you generally want to be a bit faster than the level above. This is not a strict rule, though. Sometimes going slower is an advantage because it can protect you from overreacting from small random changes in the environment. An important factor if you go the maneuver warfare route is to be able to speed up the iterations or slow them down at will. It's very important that the improvement process is never allowed to stop. Most change programs are designed to go from one steady state to another steady state. This doesn't work very well. When you go agile, like when you go lean, there is no steady state. The world continues to evolve and we want to evolve with it. We even want to evolve a bit faster than everyone else so we can, when we need to, lead and shape the evolution rather than just respond and be shaped by it. Over time, the iterations take us on an evolving path, a conceptual spiral. Note that the spiral here is a bit off center. This is because over time, as we go through the spiral and learn more, gain new capabilities, and our context changes, our goals will also shift. If you're interested in strategy, you may recognize the idea of the conceptual spiral as related to a decision model, the OODA loop, originally from Colonel John Boyd's Maneuver Conflict Strategic Framework. A version of this framework, maneuver warfare, has been adopted by, among others, the US Marine Corps and the Swedish military. The version shown here is not the original created by Colonel John Boyd. It's a slightly extended version that business strategist Peter Herman and I discussed several years ago. Now, Peter and I had, independently of each other, added close relationships to the decision model because our decisions are often very strongly influenced by the people close to us, whether it is friends, family, workmates, social media bubbles, people we dislike, and personal enemies. Peter was a bit ahead of me on this and contacted me, uh, among a number of other experts around the world, to discuss the change. I had been thinking along the same lines, but had not done anything with it, so I was very glad when Peter contacted me. At least I knew if the idea was crazy, I wasn't the only crazy person. Peter and I have been friends ever since. By the way, if you're interested in digging deeper, I strongly suggest you study Colonel John Boyd's original presentations, because most of what you will find on the internet about OODA isn't very good. This means you can't ask an AI about it either because it will have been fed junk data scraped from the internet. Now, here's a simplified version of a real life team organization. This company had begun using Scrum and they were thinking about SAFe. Scrum had been a mixed success with limited enthusiasm in most teams, and one team downright hating anything and anyone trying to push Agile on them. It turned out they had good reason to. The department manager and I mapped the flow of work and information between the teams. Each team worked with more than one product. There were plenty of dependencies between them. One team was a hardware team, and that was the team where the Scrum implementation had backfired completely. I hate Scrum was the very first thing a hardware engineer told me when I introduced myself to the team. Well, I'm not all that fond of it myself, I said. And wait, what? Aren't you the agile coach? Can you really say that? And that gave me an opportunity to explain that I did not want to force them to use Scrum or anything else. Instead, I suggested what I have told you, that we would work together to figure out what their problems are, what causes them, and begin working on a plan to fix the worst of the problems. So we started up the process in 7 teams over a span of slightly more than 6 months. The startup workshops took 2 to 3 days each. We did a lot of supporting work, ranging from fixing problems with the requirement system to training Scrum Masters in basic queuing theory to setting up a fledgling company university. In addition to this, there were people in the organization who had started their own initiatives before I joined them. One such initiative was brown bag lunch presentations, which I took advantage of to talk about parts of the agile body of knowledge that could be helpful in solving some of their problems. And this included things like lean software development, crystal extreme programming, pragmatic programming, solid queuing theories and statistical analysis, reference class forecasting, and Monte Carlo simulation. The management and I were well aware that the structure you see in the picture is not an ideal team structure, far from it. But we wanted to start where the team actually was. If we had tried to force a lean or safe type flow organization, the organization would be in a state of utter confusion. The way we did it, we could gradually build an understanding in the organization of how all the pieces were connected, what caused their problems, and how to fix them. Now, I want to stress that we are not following a linear scripted process here. It's more like having a chess tournament with many different games of chess going on at the same time. We teach how to play the game, but we do not give the organizational units and teams and departments scripted moves to make. With all this going on, how do we keep the organization together as a cohesive unit? If all the parts of the organization set off in their own directions, completely independent of each other, the, the organization would fly apart, and we don't want that. So, well, in the process I've described, each organizational unit creates a strategy goal map. The strategic goal supports the goal of a larger unit. For example, a team goal map supports a department goal map. Department goal maps support their business units support the whole organization. If you're working in a company that does top-down strategy once a year, it's very easy to interpret this as cool, business as usual. And that's not what I mean. Strategy development like this, make the strategy, execute the strategy, that fails to take unfolding new information into account. It also fails to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The organization is like a train on a railroad track that tries to barge on across a railroad bridge, even if the bridge isn't there anymore. It's much better to go the conceptual spiral route for the whole organization and treat strategy development as a continuing conversation up and down the hierarchy and across the different levels of the organization. There are a number of different ways to do that. I won't go into detail in this presentation, but I'll mention two. One is the catchball process in Hoshinkanri, the strategy deployment process in Lean. Hoshinkanri does not suit every company, but there are good ideas there that can be adapted for use. Another is the mission command or Auftragstaktik model in the maneuver warfare strategy framework. With mission command, managers focus on desired end results rather than the means of achieving them. And that is exactly what we do with the linked goal maps in this picture. Note, though, that mission command requires high levels of skill at all levels in the organization to be effective. Having a working, training, and education organization that continuously develops people is essential. Okay, and that is all for the second episode of this three-part series. Now, in the third part, we will get into the gruesome details of how an improvement workshop actually works. There will be a lot of details, so it's not for the faint of heart. It may, however, help you decide if this approach is the right one for you and your organization. So thank you for listening. See you.